everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to Loyola Marymount University. My name is Robin Crabtree. I'm the Dean of the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts. And I guess I should situate Loyola Marymount University here in Los Angeles. We're over 100 years old, although we were Loyola College from 1911, and we became Loyola Marymount University in 1974, and some of us were talking about the merging of the all-women's college with the all-men's college, so here we are. LMU features several academic programs that intersect with tonight's theme and guests, and I want to highlight those. We have a major and a minor in Asia and Pacific Studies, and it includes global immersion experiences in several Asian countries. We have, of course, a very large theological studies program, and the collective emphasis of the faculty, if you really look at the whole, is in comparative religions and interfaith work. And the faculty are very engaged in that work in the academy, on campus with students, and out in many, many communities throughout the Southland, Southern California, and really throughout the world. In our Department of Political Science, we have our newest academic major program, which is International Relations, and we're finding that students from all over the world are being attracted to that major in addition to students from here. And those programs are co-sponsors along with our master's program in yoga studies, which is the only such program in North America. In student affairs, we also have a vibrant cultural organization supporting students from around the world and ensuring they can collectively enjoy and share their cultural heritage, celebrations, food, and so on. I want to offer a special welcome to our external partner, the Tibetan Association of Southern California. I think many of you have come through that organization, and they have some nice refreshments outside for all of us. We're very proud to welcome home to LMU our alum, Tenzing Choden, who is here. He served for a decade as the North American representative to what was then called the Tibetan government in exile, and he is now, like our speaker, on the Tibetan Central Administration. Tenzing studied world relations with Dr. Chapple in 1987, and I emphasize that because he was an electrical engineering major here at LMU, but every student takes theology. And if they're lucky, they take theology from the likes of Chris Chapple. They have reconnected after 30 years, and this is the kind of lifelong student-faculty relationship that we really treasure here at LMU, and folks like Tenzing continue to be of great value to our community and to the university. As a representative of the senior leadership team here at LMU, I especially want to welcome our speaker, President Dr. Lobsang Sangay, and offer the warm regards from the senior leadership of LMU and appreciation for your presence. President Dr. Lobsang Sangay will be introduced by Dr. Christopher P. Chapple, our Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology. He's a professor in theological studies and, of course, the founder and director of our Yoga Studies program. As many of you are aware, Dr. Chapple is a prolific scholar who has published countless books, articles, papers, translations. He's a tireless administrator of programs, shepherd of students, and he's someone who consistently engages the world in his teaching, scholarship, and work on behalf of LMU. What many of you might not know is that Chris studied classical Tibetan as an undergraduate for 3 years, and he wrote his master's thesis on the synthesis of Buddhism in Tibet. So all things come from Buddhism. We'll pull all the threads of those relationships and interesting topics together And let me just welcome Chris to the podium. Enjoy the evening.
Good evening, and I'm so happy to welcome you all here this evening. And I want to particularly thank the members of the Tibet Association who helped set up the beautiful chai, and also Sarah Harrington, the Administrator for Yoga Studies, and the graduate assistants who helped, and Karin and Jensen and Ralph here, and Julia, and so many. So any event, no matter how large or so small, is always a demonstration of our capacity for hospitality. And what we will do this evening is perhaps a little seemingly less formal than you may be accustomed to. But what I want to do before giving my slightly more formal introduction of Dr. President is to salute Tenzing. And when we saw each other after 30 years, I said, "You look the same." And it's true. But he said, "I look the same," and that's not true. He graduated in 1989, and I often remember that graduation because we were a smaller place. We had 10 full-time faculty in theology. When I started, we taught 4 courses each semester, and doing the math, that graduation, I had taught 1 out of every 5 students who walked across the stage. So it was really a class for whom I have deep affection, and it's so wonderful to reconnect. And I also will thread in we're going to have sort of a conversation together, but I want to just talk by way of introduction to the President about the reach, the depth, and the scope of Tibet. We have a weekly Sanskrit translation group that convenes every Tuesday, and we thankfully were schooled through my teachers of Tibetan and Sanskrit in the precision that the Tibetans mandated. As the king said, "We will translate the entire corpus of Buddhist literature into our language." And he decreed the creation not only of an alphabet, but a grammatical analysis to make this possible. And one of the great intellectual gifts to the world has been that remarkable collection of conjure and tensure. As my wife often reminds me, the best move I ever made was to study Tibetan. And I supported us in our early married life by making microfilm and microfiche copies of the Chone and other versions of the conjure and the tensure. The conjure are the words of the faith, and the tensure extends into the Tantra. And as we heard earlier, we have so many hundreds and thousands of texts that have been passed down through the xylograph, through the xylograph prints. A mainstay of the monasteries has been the production and reproduction of this literature. Another piece that we're so grateful for is the political interaction, even beyond the ethnic Tibetan community. When Genghis Khan was holding a contest, all those almost 1,000 years ago, he invited all of the religions to lay out their best. And Tibetan Buddhism won. So from the Baltics all the way to Japan, the reach of the Mongolian Empire included a mandate for the presence of the revered Lama. and my own teacher's teacher was part of that diaspora community that was relocated from Chechnya area of the Caucasus Mountains, a Tibetan community that was swept up by the granddaughter of Tolstoy and resettled in New Jersey in the 1950s. So many stories of Geshe Wangyal and his adventures, and I'm just so grateful to have learned from people that learned from him. And today, of course, we can remember, and we must always keep in mind the sadnesses, and we will talk today of the sadnesses, but we will also be talking about resilience. The resilience that has allowed the Dalai Lama to become a beacon to the world for nonviolence, and a resilience that has led to the flourishing of the Tibetan community worldwide. And this evening, by welcoming to our campus the president of the Central Tibetan Administration, is really a remarkable event. Not only in its majesty, but also in its simplicity. And I feel like we're in a living room together, and that's really quite beautiful. Dr. Lobsang Sangay was born in 1968 and was brought up near Darjeeling. And he attended schooling at the Central School for Tibetans and completed his BA and LLB from Delhi University. And in 1992, he was already demonstrating his leadership qualities and was elected to the Tibetan Youth Congress. In 1995, he had a Fulbright, and I'm happy to say that one of our students who is not able to be here tonight is here on a Fulbright for yoga studies from Spain. Fulbright, remarkable program. And he came to Harvard. And in 2004, he was the first Tibetan to receive the JD degree from Harvard Law School, and his dissertation was Democracy in Distress. Is exile polity a remedy? A case study of Tibet's government in exile. And one of the wonderful aspects of America is the openness through our democratic system to inclusion. And at lunch today, we met with several mayors of small cities in Orange County and Southeast LA County of Asian origin, and it was just so heartwarming to see yet again another example, positive example of American democracy. Dr. Sangay is an expert on international human rights law. He's spoken at seminars all over the world. In 2011, he was elected Sikyong, which is now the title of President of the Central Tibetan Administration, and in close relationship with the Dalai Lama. And part of what we will hear about is the Dalai Lama's rather remarkable decision to devolve the administration of the great nation of Tibet to the parliament and to its elected leader. And this is to be celebrated and continued. He's a frequent writer of op-ed pieces and a really remarkable champion for human rights worldwide. And as we have our conversation tonight, I'm sure we will touch on many topics of contemporary concern beyond the Tibetan community, and looking to the Tibetan community as the exemplar of resilience. Dr. Sangay.
Thank you for the kind Chapple and great to be here. Can't hear it? Yeah, turn it off. Yeah, good. So I've been driven around the whole day by Tenzing and members of the Tibetan Administration in Southern California. So fortunately, as I was just sharing during lunch also, I just had one day trip to Portland, one day to Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, Santa Fe, here. And everywhere I went, they've been saying, next time when you come, you must see the most famous Mount Randall, Seattle, Mount Hood, and Rocky Mountains of Denver, and so on and so forth. And I was complaining during lunch, I'm here in LA. I've heard about things about LA, even the Hollywood sign, Universal Studio, and the beach, you know. And I'm very grateful that the organizers took me to the beach. At least I saw the beach for 12 minutes and 33 seconds because we had to rush here. And having had just sumptuous dinner with Thai curry, which is making its way, and it's so I'm half jet lag and half Thai curry is and then having just been to beach for 12.5 minutes, I think half my brain is on that side. I should spend more time that side than come here. But then you know, we are a bit late actually, so I hope you understand that I've heard of LA traffic, but to actually live it, it's altogether another thing. In Delhi, it's also problematic with traffic, but if you can meet 3 people and get 3 things done in Delhi, it's a miracle. I think in LA, if you can get 2 things done, I think it's good if you have 2. So tomorrow I have an event beginning at 8:30. Then we had a heated debate when I should leave for airport. My flight is 11:45. I have to catch my flight to go to Mexico. I think I should leave at 9:30 because instead of starting the program 8:30 and ending at 11:30, maybe I should be on the safer side. You know? So I'm very grateful that you all are here. I know it's normally Friday. You also thank God it's Friday. But today is thank God it's long weekend Friday. So you all are sacrificing a lot to be here. I know. So that means you all care for Tibetan people, and that's why you are here. Now, as for the topic, we are supposed to discuss about Tibetan democracy. I think we can get to that. Perhaps I'll mention 3 points. The devolution of authority by His Holiness Dalai Lama in 2011 was on one part a separation of church and state, because from mid-17th century all the way to 2011, the Dalai Lamas have been the both political and spiritual leader of the Tibetan people. And then in 2011 he decided to separate the church and the state and devolve all his political authority to the elected leader. So that's a remarkable move or a contribution, because what we see in Syria and Venezuela, essentially political leader holding on to power and to devolve, despite devolved political authority, despite appeals after appeals by Tibetans not to do so. Because we Tibetans always pray and wish and hope that His Holiness Dalai Lama remain our both political and spiritual leader. And it was his vision and farsightedness that he decided to do so in 2011. So in compared to other political leaders, that's a remarkable contribution to democracy. And he himself said, then and now also, he said he did it willingly, happily, for the sake of democracy, because he felt one person, spiritually, especially a spiritual person, holding on to political authority contradicts some of the basic values of spiritual masters, but particularly from a democratic point of view. Hence, if you analyze this issue from separation of church and state, you can do that. And other factor is also the fact that Tibetans have democracy in exile. It's another remarkable contribution, because if you have studied democracy, from Robert Dahl to anyone, they always say, no state, no democracy. Democracy assumes state, but we are in exile. So democracy in exile, it is like democracy without borders, and literally it is so because I was today. I was joined by two congressmen and women during lunch, and when I was talking to them, they have to come to their constituency every weekend to be with the people who voted for them. But congressmen or women have a district to cover, senators have state to cover, President of America has country to cover. Now, because I was elected by Tibetans in 40 countries, I have continents to cover. So the fact that you are democracy in exile, it in itself is a very complicated process. But Tibetan voters are quite generous. I came once to LA during my first term. This is my second term during my second term. So if they don't see the leader in 5 years, they are all right. So they're not that demanding. And also because unlike other democratic elected leaders, the Tibetan democracy is very unusual. If you promise bread, butter, and shelter, you lose election. Normally, you promise bread, butter, and shelter, you win election. In our case, you have to promise higher goals, freedom struggle. So the emphasis is on freedom struggle rather than your personal gains or personal livelihood. So it's unique. Now, philosophically, there is a contradiction between democracy and exile. Because we lost our country, it's under occupation of People's Republic of China since 1959. So our goal is to return home. Hence, when you're in exile, any freedom struggle, if you study African National Congress or Indian independence movement or Northern Ireland or East Timor, you just name any exile movement, because their goal is to return home, they have one objective, one goal. Then normally unity is emphasized and one leadership. Single leader, single goal, and unity. But if you are democratic, if it is democracy, then there is inherent contradiction between the two, because instead of unity, you emphasize diversity. Instead of one leader, you have to have opposition parties. Instead of one view, you have to have freedom of speech. So philosophically, there is a contradiction between the two. You cannot have one leader, there has to be opposition parties. You cannot have one voice, there has to be diversity, there has to be freedom of speech, and hence there is contradiction between the two. So to be democratic in exile is a challenge in itself. How you combine the two is a challenge. Hence, in that sense, it's a lab test. Because among the 60 million refugees and diaspora that you see around the world, from Syria, you just name any groups, Angola or Sudanese, Somalis. And if you analyze all their freedom movements, they are not democratic in true sense of it. Even the African National Congress, with Nelson Mandela as the leader. He was in prison for 28 years and 8 years in solitary confinement. But he was not elected every 4 or 5 years. He was a leader. So Ramos Horta of East Timor, they were in exile. Yes, he had an elected position, but it was not elected as per the democratic system where you have election every 4 or 5 years. It's not the way you have one leader. That's how it focused. So the fact that we have democratic system, it's remarkable. And this is a lab test. If we succeed, then it's a good example, a good model for other refugees and diaspora around the world. So hence, in that sense, we are making contribution towards democracy, and also we are challenging the theory by Robert Dahl and all the scholars of democracy: no state, no democracy. We are saying yes, without state there can be democracy. Democracy without borders is the the Tibetan democracy. So that's even at a mega level, These are the contributions, church and the separation of church and the state by His Holiness Dalai Lama, and Exile and Democracy are the contribution that we Tibetans are making. And if you come to Dharamsala, you will be happy to see, and if there are any graduate students you want to write your master thesis, you can come and analyze. You will find that Tibetan administration is the most frugally run administration ever. And I'm in the second term, so people ask me what will I do in my after I finish my term. And I said, if you want the cheapest president to run anything, I will be available. Because as I was introduced, I spent 16 years in Boston, did my master's and doctorate degree, and I worked as I was appointed fellow and senior fellow at Harvard Law School. So I had a full-time, good job that, when you are, I was not teaching, so more if you're on the research side, your life is quite convenient, isn't it? Quite easy. So what you do is you get up at, whenever you want to get up in the morning, because there's no one to teach and you don't have to follow a schedule. So you drive to your gym, then to Starbucks, then you open the sports column of Boston Globe. So, and if the weather is good, you say, hey, why not some more hours? If the weather is bad, all the reasons why you spend some more hours in a Starbucks. So I open the sports section of Boston Globe and go through the baseball, and football, and all that. And I'm sorry to say I'm a fan of Red Sox, which is leading at the moment. And I'm more sorry to say I'm a big fan of Patriots. I know it's not that popular to say it's part of the world, no? Isn't it? So LA just have now football team, so you're not that rabid as such. Not many people like New England Patriots, yeah. But even I'm Buddhist, but when it comes to Patriots, my compassion goes away. So I was happily employed in People's Republic of Cambridge. And then in 2011, I got elected. So I left Harvard, US, and Starbucks. And now I'm working for $450 a month. I mean, where can you get a president of an administration for $450 a month? And that's why I say it's frugally run. Because I take $450 a month, because the rest of the staff will take less than $450 a month. And again, Tibetan administration is based on Buddhist values, and we were talking about this Tibetan democracy. Buddhist values, because if you want salary, go somewhere else. If you want to serve, come to Tibetan administration. So that's basic understanding. And there's almost zero corruption, because no one is coming there for money. They are coming there because it's labor of love. So once you remove money as the factor, salary as the factor from your job, there's less competition. There's no money. And the service is sincere. So hence we run the most frugally honest run administration. It's not just democratic, but it's also frugally run. And quite an effective one. Also, when we get a foreign aid from US government, we spend anywhere from 7%, at most 12% on administrative costs. 88% to 93% goes directly to the project. So you don't get that. Now, what happens if USAID is giving a grant? Just like that, the agency in DC, whichever organization it is, they take 18% cut in direct cost. Then they add direct cost. Then the subsidiary in India, wherever, they take additional 12% to 18%. Ultimately, they take anywhere from 33 to 52 to 60% cut before the money reaches the project. That's how it's run. We 7% and the rest goes directly to the project. So you don't work for salary because you want to save the money so that you can send more children to school. You can provide more health care. You can take care of elderly. So that's how we run things. So hence, the Tibetan administration is a model where other refugee communities and other people in diaspora can emulate. Also we run our own schools, and I'm one of the, and many of the people who are here in the school who are educated in Tibetan schools. And we run our own hospitals, and we run our own settlements, and these are quite effectively run. So now, if you compare with some, highly developed countries, they're still slow, it's bureaucratic. But if you compare to countries even in South Asia, Tibetan administration is more productive. For example, Tibetan literacy rate of the people who are below the age of 60, that's when our parents fled Tibet and came to India, is 94%, which is higher than India, higher than Nepal, higher than Bangladesh, higher than Pakistan. So we are in South Asia, our literacy rate is higher. So on and so forth. And Tibetans are also quite hardworking. And at least because of exile and diaspora situation, because you have nothing to fall back on, like the Jewish or the Lebanese in Africa, and so on and so forth, Gujaratis in Africa also. They are traders, they are business people by interest. And you have no option but to, there's no fallback plan. In fact, Tibetans are quite hardworking. Even in America, they have this reputation. When you hire one Tibetan, the boss will hire 3 or 10 Tibetans. For example, when His Holiness Dalai Lama visited Minnesota, because all the Tibetans are working in healthcare, they are the hospitals, things like that. The person in charge of personnel have tough time, because if His Holiness comes for 3 days, then you can schedule the 30% will go today, 30%. If it comes for 1 day, everybody wants to go see His Holiness, then you have shut down hospitals, right? So, because that shows that if one Tibetan gets in, they hire 3 or 10. Because they are, that way, law-abiding, honest, hardworking Tibetans. Even in New York, Tibetan nannies are big in demand because they are known to be Dalai Lama's people who take care of their children like their own. I can't vouch for that, but that's the reputation Tibetans have. So even in India, I went to Ludhiana. That's where the sweater sellers are, the Indian sweater sellers. So Tibetans have been doing business with Ludhiana sweater sellers for 40 years, and this is how it runs. So Tibetan person brings 100,000 rupees cash, and he or she gets anywhere from 200,000 to 400,000 rupees loan, but no collateral, no contract, no agreement, nothing. There's only piece of paper. It's not clear. Yeah. Oh, she's checking. Yeah. No collateral, nothing. So there's only one piece of paper. That is, they ask, what's your name? You say, Tenzing Doma. And you say, which place are you from? Political settlement, house number 36. And where you do your business partner, the city. Only four details you need. Less than security, social security number here. And on that basis, you get 200 to 400,000 rupees. And that piece of paper, there's only one piece of paper. And their business has been done 40 years. And why did they say 99% of Tibetans return money on time? So this is how the law-abiding or honest and loyal Tibetans are. So if you're going to looking for employees, I think professor, So these are the values, underlying values we Tibetans have, and this is how the Tibetan administration is also set up. So hence why I made this point is I'm here in LA. So many Tibetans sacrificing their Friday evening of long weekend because this is our relationship. Even though Tibetan administration, we don't have prison, we don't have police, we don't have military, nothing like that. When I write a speech or a directive, they can choose to ignore. Nothing will happen to them. Today I'm coming here, if none of them shows, nothing will happen. I can't do anything. I don't have law enforcement mechanism to even tax them more. I don't have that capacity. But we do show up because this is the Tibetan values, this is the relationship where the administration and the people have built. And this, I think, is a model where other refugee groups and even other communities can implement, and implement in a more successful way. And in that sense, Tibetan democracy, as envisioned by Holiness, is a success story. Democracy in exile is a success story. The Tibetan administration, the way we run things, is a success story because this is simply a labor of love. And all the one-day stops that I had is part of labor of love. So I'm pretty exhausted by now. Tomorrow I have to go to Mexico. I'll be spending 3 days there. Then one night in DC, one night in New York, and then fly same afternoon to Delhi. And that if I catch the next flight, I'll fly straight to Dharamsala. And after 6 days, I have Tibetan Parliament session. Now, I've been to Parliament in London, UK. I went to see the Parliament debate in Australia, in Canada, and obviously in the US also. But our debate, I've seen all the debates. The most famous one is the House of Commons in the UK, the Prime Minister's debate. If you compare our debate, pales in comparison, nothing like that. I went, last time I asked in Australia, they get 2 hours debate, or 1 hour debate. And you have to submit your questions in writing. And people are so excited. And I said, in our parliament, 45 members of parliament can ask any number of questions for any number of days, and we have to answer. The report was the one minister had to answer 365 questions for 3 days. Yes. And then impromptu. You don't get notice. These are the questions going to come. Someone just get up and ask 10 questions, you're supposed to answer all 10 questions right then. Sometimes they ask, how many magazines does your department subscribe? How many subscribe? But nonetheless, our parliament system is also very robust. In that sense, accountable from democratic point of view. So this is the system we have, and I hope I'm just sharing this. So some of you, when you hear the word democracy, you just assume a lot of things, right? It might be something like Indian Parliament or US Congress or Canadian Parliament. Ours is very quite unique. Hence, once I invited a well-known writer to the Tibetan Parliament. And I suppose it's quite polite. We are quite polite, actually. She wrote that Indian parliamentarians can learn a lot from Tibetan parliamentarians. And there was one comment. Obviously, now this day and age of comments, right? So the Facebook comment was, first, our Indian parliamentarians should go to exile. We can implement the Tibetan system in India. So, that's part joke. But what I'm trying to say is, we learned this democracy system from Indian democracy system. The constitution we have adopted is mainly adapted as per the Indian constitution, and we are extremely grateful to the great country of India and the Indian government for what they have done. And we are very honored and we are very privileged to be hosted in India. And as a beneficiary of Fulbright and someone who spent 16 years in People's Republic of Cambridge, I am also very grateful to the US government for giving me the grant and giving me the opportunities to pursue my studies. And I am who I am standing here partly because I studied Canada, and partly because Tibetans also voted for me. Because I was from America and I was at Harvard. They didn't know I spent so much of my time at Starbucks. Now I can say that because I've completed second term. I can now, now they all think, oh my goodness, we got cheated, right? he was never, and he is not the academic we thought he would be, and he is not the leader who we thought he was. But I'm in the second term, it's the final term, so they cannot vote, so I can be more honest. Thank you.
Can you see here? Okay, so in this part of the program, I'll just ask a couple of questions. We haven't rehearsed, we haven't really planned anything.
Well, honest confession. He's a good organizer. He sent pointers to Professor Chapple. He forgot to send it to me. So I didn't know the topic and the points that you're supposed to discuss. Now you have all the points, yes.
So one of the remarkable observations over the years has been how Madhyamaka philosophy continues to be expressed in every address, not only by the Dalai Lama, but also by the president here. And if you noticed, he said, in a democracy, you're supposed to have this side and that side. And the implication, which was unspoken, was the middle. And when we think about Madhyamaka philosophy, which was put forward by the great scholar Nagarjuna, this is the constant refrain, that if there is a coming, there must be a going. If there's a going, there must be a coming. But how can there ever be an arrival? It becomes a little bit mysterious. And just as we felt good humor in the remarks, so also we feel that good humor with His Holiness. And I wondered if you could talk in some ways about this cultural warp and woof of Nagarjuna, of always working with the middle way as a foundation for good politics.
I go forward. But you should know two things. My position is Sito, which means I'm a political administrator, not religious leader. Now when you get into Nagarjuna and Madhyamaka, I'm looking at Geshe-la. I think you better come. He's taking me to that world which I've never studied. So sometimes I worry when I'm asked this spiritual type of questions. If I answer, right? If I'm wrong, I get embarrassed. Not only wrong, I get embarrassed. I go to hell. That's a difficult one. Normally when there are no monks in the audience, I give some spiritual and he is from Dharamsala. Tomorrow it will be reported, oh, Sito, my goodness, he had no clue what he was talking about. And he answered about Nagarjuna and Madhyamaka and Middle Way. Anyway, it makes sense because exile and democracy are two contradictions. Yet we are trying to find a middle ground. So the inherent contradiction between the two. And that's where, again, if you studied not much, I don't know much about Nagarjuna and Madhyamaka, the dialectics that we have in Buddhist discourse ultimately is to reach a point devoid of experience. So Nagarjuna's middle way is considered the most comprehensive, most in-depth concept of middle way. Right? Of course, there are other views about middle way. And also the solution for the Tibetan issue also, again, is based on middle way. So we take into consideration what the Chinese government say. What they say is sovereignty and territorial integrity are non-negotiable as far as China is concerned. And unity of the motherland it cannot be negotiated. And then what we Tibetans say is, okay, we understand that. Now if you end repression of Tibetan people and grant us genuine autonomy as per Chinese laws, then we will not seek separation from China. Again, trying to find a middle ground of what China is saying is Tibet cannot separate from China. Tibet has to remain within China. That's the bottom line. And what we are saying, we accept that. But you must end repression of Tibetan people. And hence, we get to the middle ground. And there we say, genuine autonomy is what we want. So the solution that we propose is also based on middle way. And the implementation of democracy that we have between exile and democracy is also a middle way that we are trying to implement. So middle way is often is what we try to embrace and implement.
I'm thinking also of compassion. And so much oppression has been known in this country. And as we look at American history, where there was this concept of manifest destiny, which, just like with China, pushed all the way to the west. And just as with the Tibetan people, the indigenous peoples of this country were first pushed to the west, all the way to Oklahoma. Then their land was taken, even from Oklahoma. And in our state of California, there was actually, when California joined the Union and was wrested away from Mexico, the US government paid bounty for native scalps. The brutality was staggering. And we add to that a reflection on our history of slavery and on the horrendous passage from Africa to the eastern seaboard, and then the maltreatment of the slaves. And as we are in a process of recovery, we have learned so much from Asian wisdom. And if we recall the insights of the Transcendentalists, of Emerson and Thoreau, and you're part of the country where you lived for 16 years, where people said, we have to stand up, we have to speak truth to power, and we have to be willing to practice and participate in civil disobedience in order to effect change. And incrementally, abolition was successful, and yet we still grapple with the aftermath of those decades and decades of oppression. And there's unfortunately been a welling up of angry language, of a public naming of white supremacy that is an embarrassment for many of us. And yet we find that even despite all of our wonderful values, that we are not exempt. And I'm wondering if from the Tibetan perspective, you might be able to give us some good advice as we negotiate very interesting political territory within this country.
That's a big one, no? Globally, you can clearly see there's decline of internationalism and also decline of liberalism. And then there is rise of nationalism and extremism. So in that context, what you see in America or in Asia or Europe, the more the right wing or the right side parties and people are also on the rise. So you can clearly see there is a rise of nationalism. And the nationalism is expressed in different forms. And extremism, from IS to IS in Syria and Iraq and Boko Haram in African continents, and even right-wing Buddhist groups in Thailand and other places. So you can clearly see there's the rise of extremism also. So hence globally, there is a contradiction and conflict between internationalism and extremism, or nationalism, and liberalism and extremism. So in that context, what you see in America is nothing different from what's happening around the world. So, I think this conflict will go on, and I hope, and that's what we all are, betting on, and what we all believe in, is the, again, the liberalism prevail, and the liberalism prevail. So if liberalism prevails, and more compassionate world can be developed, because ultimately, this one world, one humanity, we have to find a solution through dialogue, not through violence. Hence, Tibetan movement also, we follow non-violence, and what we propose is also a very compassionate-based understanding of China's situation, and then what we propose is a win-win solution for the issue of Tibet. And I hope the discourse in America will be also dialogue, not destruction and violence. Discourse in Europe also will be dialogue, and so in Asia. So that way, we find a solution that is agreeable to everybody. Because why we say that we have to find a solution of the issue of Tibet through dialogue, or the non-violent, peaceful way, mainly because ultimately we have to live together or side by side. Ultimately we want peace. And even the processes, if the process is peaceful, then the solution will last longer. So that's why, that's the maybe compassion-based solution or approach to everything. Because the situation in Tibet is very grim. 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. 99.9% of monks and nuns were destroyed in 1960s. And an estimated million Tibetans perished through hunger, through and through killings also, for a lot of factors. Despite all the tragedy, what His Holiness Dalai proposed is peaceful way, a non-violent way of solution. Hence, unless there is an element of compassion in the analysis, in the thinking, you won't propose that kind of solution. And we are not saying we should be the model, but this is how we approach things. And you can clearly see this globally. What you see is a bit disturbing. And we are betting on, liberalism to prevail and internationalism to prevail. So hope it works out.
I have one more question and topic before we open it to the floor, and it's about water. And as we look at the world map, we see the great rivers of Asia originate on the Tibetan Plateau. We heard a little bit earlier today what I think we're all familiar with, that with climate change, the glaciers are melting, and the flooding is becoming more extreme. Tibet has flourished with a very, very rugged environment where so little will grow, it's so cold and high. And what I would like you to share is from both a geopolitical but also a climatological and geological point of view, how, for me, Tibet has, and for many of us in the West, has always been the Shangri-La, has been that wonderful place of those transcendent, ascended beings that give us wisdom and give us spiritual nurture. But in this case, that spiritual nurture is not other than the very water that allows so many to live. So I'm mixing up a few metaphors here and introducing both physical and spiritual and conflating them. But I would like to hear your perspective governmentally, how water will define the planet as we move into the next century.
Let me give the context so that we have better understanding. The size of China, we all know. But if you actually look at the ethnic map of China, then you find that the Han Chinese population lived in little more than 1/4 or 1/3, between 1/3 and 1/4 of China. Rest of the 2/3 were inhabited by quote-unquote minorities from Chinese point of view. And territorially, 1/4 of China was Tibet. So Tibet, from as far as territory is concerned, is as big as Texas and California combined. If Tibet was an independent country, it will be the 10th largest country. So Tibet was that big. So now you see the reason why China occupied Tibet. It's only 1/3 and huge population, up to 1.3 billion, 1.2 billion are Han Chinese. So they needed land. Tibet has a huge tract of land. Number two, Tibet is called in Chinese, Xizang, which means Western treasure. So Tibet is considered the land of treasure. So there are 123 different kinds of minerals: gold, copper, uranium, borax, and the second largest copper mine in China is in Tibet. So billions and billions of dollars worth of natural resources are in Tibet, so that you can clearly see. And often in the movies and the pictures, Tibet is shown as this high plateau, very dry. But major part of Tibet is very green, it's forest area. Now, water is the third, because often water is called nowadays the white gold. Now, Tibet is also called the third pole. After Antarctica and Arctic, Tibet has the third highest reserve price. The difference being in Antarctica and Arctic, when they melt, it goes to ocean. But the Tibetan ice or the snow is valuable. When they melt, it forms fresh water and rivers. Now the water flowing from Tibet provides fresh water to 1.4 billion people. So 1.4 billion people are dependent on water flowing from Tibet. And Tibet is also called the water tower of Asia. All the major rivers of Asia, Indus and Satluj, from Tibet it flows to Jammu and Kashmir, Pakistan. This is a lifeline for Pakistan. And Brahmaputra is a lifeline for Bangladesh, starting Tibet. Mekong River, Salween River, Irrawaddy River for ASEAN countries. For Vietnam, we all have read about Mekong River. Right? We all think Mekong is Vietnam, but it starts from Tibet. And Yangtze River, Yellow River. We all have read about the Three Gorges Dam in Yangtze River, the largest dam in the world. Again, the Yangtze River starts from Tibet. Yellow River is the cradle of Chinese civilization. And also, Indus River is the cradle of Indian civilization because the name India came from Indus River. So you can clearly see all these rivers are flowing from Tibet. Now we all pay money to buy water. Here we are drinking. But for centuries we shared our water with all our neighbors for free. Had we charged $1 per liter, Tibet would have been one of the richest, top 10 richest economy in the world. Because of our compassion and Buddhist generosity, we remained a poor country. With living too much in Buddhism, we forgot to take care of natural resources, and Chinese called us Xizang, Western treasure. That's where we should go. So when Chinese army invaded Tibet, we didn't have army of 10,000 people. Not only 10,000, 3,000, 6,000 or 7,000 were militias. So that how unprepared we were. Now, the problem is, in the last 100 years, 50% of the glaciers of Tibet have melted and disappeared. Now we have 46,000 glaciers. As per NASA, by 2100, 60, even 70% of the remaining glaciers will melt and disappear at this rate. What's happening? Urbanization of Tibet. A lot of Chinese are moving into Tibetan areas. Thereby, you have to build houses, you have to build roads, you have to build railway line, and hence urbanization, industrialization, hydropower, mining, all these things are happening. Now, Tibet is very delicate, and we all read about the rainforest of Brazil. It's so fragile, we have to protect it. And there are so many activists and Greenpeace people protecting the rainforest of Brazil. But the other most delicate in the rainforest is the Himalayan belt. Unless you preserve that, there will be environmental catastrophe in that area. Now, as per NASA, 60 to 70% of the remaining 46,000 glaciers will melt and disappear. If that happens, there will be a crisis in that part of the world immediately and to the rest of the world. In that part of the world, because 1.4 billion people depend on rivers flowing from Tibet, where will they get the water? Now already China has 19% of the world population, but only 12% of fresh water, which means already 400 million Chinese are facing scarcity of fresh water in north and northeast of China. Now Tibet is the water tower, and rivers are flowing to all the neighboring countries. And obviously, if the water crisis in China becomes more severe, Chinese might divert Tibetan rivers towards China, then let it flow to neighboring countries. Hence, what is also called the white boat. Hence, this is what's happening. And to restore the stewardship or the guardianship of the Tibetan Plateau to the Tibetan people is very important. If you don't do that, the industrialization, urbanization that's happening now will have major crashes, and Chinese will also suffer. And not just that, as per the scientists from University of California, the jet stream over Tibet affects the climate all the way to America and Latin America. Even there's scientists in Quebec who have said that whether the winter will be warm in Canada or not is dependent on the jet stream and the climate in Tibet. So Tibet serves as the refrigerator or cooler for the rest of the world. So the heat wave here or in Europe that's happening is directly related to the climatic changes and the environmental changes in Tibet. Hence, even the Chinese scientists, you can Google this, Chinese scientists have proposed to the Chinese government to declare Tibet as the third pole national park, because Tibet is so fragile, so delicate, that we have to protect this for the sake of China, for the sake of Asia, for the sake of the world. One thing, because what's happened now is, if there's 1 degree increase in temperature in the rest of the world, there's 2 degrees increase in Tibet, because of the altitude, so for very scientific reasons. Now, if this trend continues, Tibet is filled with permafrost, in the sense frozen land. When the permafrost melts, what happens is it opens up, and not just carbon monoxide, but it's methane. Methane will explode from the Tibetan Plateau. And methane is 20 times, if I'm not wrong, more harmful than carbon monoxide. Now, if billions of metric tons of methane is released from the Tibetan Plateau, because it's so high, it affects the climate all over the world. So hence the consequences, environmental consequences, and consequences for humanity is so severe, the crisis is building up. For centuries, Tibetan, as the steward of the plateau, somehow we have balanced all. We maintained the delicate nature of the Tibetan plateau. But if the trend of so many Chinese moving in to Tibetan areas, and urbanization and exploitation of minerals continue, damming the rivers continue, these are the consequences the whole of humanity and Asia will have to suffer.
I'd like to invite questions from the audience.
President Lobsang Sangay. My name is Chol Siring, and I have very two questions which already discussed on the podium right now. First is for the middle way approach, and the second is self-evolution. So I wanted to ask these two questions, which is very important for Tibetans, in the exile or in Tibet. The first question is, since 2008, the middle way approach, Tibetan government exile, they have submitted a memorandum to Chinese government in 2008. So since then, we have not had any response from Chinese government. So I wanted to ask Sikong, do you have any news, any update on the back channel conversation between Chinese government and Tibetan government exile? I've heard from many sources, you're saying that this is a very sensitive talk. We don't want to disclose to the Tibetan community. So if you have any good news for us, that'd be great. Second question is for the self-evaluation. So far we have 148 Tibetans self-evaluated. The numbers every year going up. So obviously we all know His Holiness discouraged Tibetans to do self-immolation. So I want to ask you, what is the stand from Tibetan government exile as far as self-immolation is concerned? Thank you.
On dialogue, I've said this before, it's confidential. Did I say that? Yeah. No, because when you have track 2, 3 kind of dialogue, in any country, till President Obama opened up his relationship with Cuba, how many people knew that Canada was used and Pope played a role in opening up Cuba in relationship with the US. Similar with nuclear deal also. So a lot of things have to happen behind the scene till you have the formal dialogue. So what I've said is, again, it's not that confidential. What I've said is there is no formal dialogue between envoys of the Dalai Lama and the representative of the Chinese government. From 2002 to 2010, yes, envoys of the Dalai Lama met the Chinese counterpart 10 times. 9 times informally, 9 times formally, 1 time informally. So there were meetings before, and the last meeting was January of 2010. But there are Chinese businessmen, there are Chinese Buddhists, there are Chinese, who are sympathetic to Tibetan people or who are, very respectful of His Holiness Dalai Lama. So they do come back and forth with the journalists. So that way, I think, messages go back and forth. So that much I can share. But Chinese leadership, they will have the biggest meeting on October 18th of this year, where the 19th Party Congress, 19th plenum will happen, where the Communist Party leaders will meet, and they will select their next leadership. They will elect 3,000 or so members, will elect 200 to 300 Central Committee members, who in turn will elect the Politburo and the Standing Committee of the Politburo. So by late August, we will know who the next 7 leaders will be. Xi Jinping will stay. Now, who the other members will be, that will mainly influence what their policies will be towards Tibetan people, what at large, but particular Tibetan people. And whether there will be some breakthrough during Xi Jinping's second term or not is to be seen. But if you look at past history, Deng Xiaoping, after he consolidated his position, there was a breakthrough on Tibet issue. They opened the channel. When Chen Zemin, the president of China, consolidated his position, then also he opened up second round of dialogue. So whether Xi Jinping will do in his second term or not is to be seen, because in second term, like Obama opening up relationship with Cuba and Iran, you look for legacy items. If that's the case, then Tibet is a low-hanging fruit for Chinese leadership, because we pursue non-violence, we pursue peaceful methods. What we pursue, or we seek, is genuine autonomy, which is a win-win proposition for both the Chinese government and the Tibetan people. So in that way, Tibet is a low-hanging fruit that Chinese government can, leave a profound legacy in the world also. So let's see what happens. Now, as far as self-immolation is concerned, Central Tibetan Administration have discouraged self-immolation consistently and categorically. Because, first of all, as a Tibetan, life is precious. We are only 6 million Tibetans, and there are 1.2 billion Chinese, which means for every Tibetan there are 199 Chinese. So we have to preserve our life and, and take part in the Tibetan freedom struggle, as long as possible. So every life is precious, hence we discourage self-immolation. So that we have made it very clear. Despite our appeals, self-immolation continues. Just this year we had, of this 149, we had 4 self-immolation this year. But now we are Tibetan, we are Buddhist, yet there is self-immolation. Question is why? But if you look at the genesis of self-immolation, it's very clear. Because from 1950s and 60s, we had a lot of protests in Tibet. But each time there's a protest, a simple protest of saying long live His Holiness Dalai Lama, or freedom for Tibetan, anything. You just have one slogan in the marketplace, you are arrested. You are put in prison and sentenced for a long time. And while in prison, you are tortured so much, so often, that by the time you are released, you are crippled or you are in serious health situation. So hence, Tibetans seem to have concluded that, simply by participating in a protest, if you have to suffer so long and die anyways, or live a miserable life, why not have a quick death? So hence they are burning themselves. So the blame lies with the Chinese government and the repressive policies. If they allow protest, if they allow Tibetans to come up to the streets, then there won't be self-immolation. Or if they solve the issue of Tibet, there won't be self-immolation. So that's why, the blame lies with Beijing. And I hope Chinese leadership will realize that the repressive policy is not working, and more liberal, policies are required and reforms are required to address the situation of the Tibetan people.
Questions? Yeah, I'd love to hear a question from an LMU student.
Any questions?
He's a future LMU student. What do you think about the Indian support to Indian government region support to Tibet? It's positive, growing, or it's just same as before? It's not. It looks like it's changing a little bit. So what do you know about this total Indian government's policy on Tibet lately? Is it changing from benefits of Tibet?
I think the largest number of Tibetans are in India. Tibetan administration is based in India, and His Holiness Dalai Lama, as he himself says, he is the longest guest of the government of India. And that way, I think what India has done, no country has done for Tibetan people. India is a developing country, but it has hosted us, the largest number of Tibetans, Tibetan administration. That way, we are very grateful. So even from humanitarian point of view, they have done the most. No country has done. So now the issue is whether Indian government should speak out on the issue of Tibet more overtly or not. In recent days, what we see is that what was happening behind the scene, what was happening closed door, has become open door policy of the Indian government. So, for example, His Holiness meeting with President of India at the Rashtrapati Bhavan was a public event. So there were meetings before between presidents of India and it's always Dalai Lama, but it's out in open. So even, bearing US, some countries, in other countries in Europe, and they shy away from meeting with His Holiness Dalai Lama, hosting Tibetan people. But India, it's out there, So ministers meeting with, His Holiness Dalai Lama, not just meeting His Holiness. In fact, Culture Ministry organized the International Conference on Buddhism, and he was the chief guest. So I have been to many events where I sit side by side with Indian cabinet ministers. When I go to different countries, they shy away from meeting you far less publicly. So that way, I think India has done a lot for the Tibetan people, and it's more open nowadays. That's the change.
Good evening, and I want to sincerely thank LMU faculty, Dr. Chapple, the Tibetan Association, for giving us this wonderful opportunity to have a close discussion with Sikyo. I'm sorry to hear that you have a very tight schedule this time, and you had only a couple of minutes to spend at the beach, but I'm sincerely requesting that the next time you come around, we would have a leisurely afternoon.
Yeah, next time it's a loaded term. I have to come all the way. It's a running joke, it's a running health joke. Everywhere they've been saying, next time when you come, you climb Mount Raina, Mount Hood, and
So we'll save that for the next visit, to have a leisurely afternoon with the rest of the Tibetan Association members at the beach. Okay, so my primary question that I have, it's essentially a twofold question. The first question that I have is, what is the pulse of relationship that you feel from the current US administration, particularly the White House, to the Tibetan government in exile? My second follow-up question to that would be, recently I've heard stories, I don't know if that is true, that there's been some budgetary cuts from the US to the Tibetan government in exile. So if that is true, what is the implication to the day-to-day running of the Tibetan government in exile? Thank you.
That's for the second one. In the executive summary, which comes from the White House, that is normally the proposal of the budget. And the budget is determined more by the appropriation committee of the US House and US Senate. So in the executive summary, yes, it was shown that main portion of the funding will be cut for Tibetan people. But recently, the House appropriation committee has submitted its budget, and where it's clearly mentioned that the funding should be restored. The funding should be provided, not restored, provided, not less than what was provided before in the House. Now, Senate will set their budget in the month of September, and both in the Senate and the House they have to reconcile, and the President has to sign. So it's a long way process. I think they have barely 3 weeks to get all these things done. So I don't know whether it will be done or not. Then if it's not done, then they will have something called CR, Continuing Resolution. So they will continue the budget of last year. So we have funding for last year. If they continue the same budget this year, we will have funding. But I don't think it will be cut to zero. Whatever cut that they're proposing, anywhere from 10% to 28% for foreign aid, some portion will be cut, but it won't be reduced to zero as indicated by the executive summary. Because our funding has always come from, not always, but mainly come from House and the Senate appropriation committee. So it's a Congress-led funding mainly. So that way I think we are very hopeful it will continue. Go to the second question, because I'm still digesting yellow curry and red curry from Thai restaurants. Huh? Trump administration, yes, that's true. When Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was confirmed, in the confirmation hearing, he said he supports dialogue and he supports human rights of the Tibetan people. And I know that when he met the Chinese counterpart recently, a Chinese foreign minister, he has raised the issue of Tibet. So that way it's continuing. And also the US ambassador to China, during his confirmation hearing, he has spoken much more strongly on the issue of Tibet. So from what we know from the US ambassador and the Secretary of State, the policy of the Trump administration will continue the past policies of the US presidents. Now, till President Trump meets with His Holiness Dalai Lama, we won't know the detail. So, His Holiness is not scheduled to visit Washington, D.C. this year, so we won't know. But we are hopeful that the US president will continue the past tradition of meeting with His Holiness Dalai Lama in the White House. So that's where it is.
Okay. Well, Craig.
What?
I don't think you require.
What role does forgiveness play in if the win-win situation is accepted by China? Then what role does forgiveness play on the part of the Chinese, on the part of the Tibetan people, on the part of the Central Tibetan Administration, in the atrocities that have been committed by the Chinese government?
Yeah, already in the proposal from the Tibetan side, forgiveness or element of compassion is there. Because, an estimated 1 million Tibetans perish. We are not raising that. Tibet is under occupation, minerals are exploited, hydropower, all these things are going on. We are not raising that. In fact, we are taking into consideration what Chinese government is saying. Sovereignty of China, territorial integrity, unity of the motherland cannot be touched, and one China is non-negotiable. So essentially what we are saying is, yes, we accept one China, but give us genuine autonomy as per Chinese laws. So the forgiveness is, it's already reflected in the proposal that we're offering. And the fact that we are pursuing non-violence despite all the atrocities, it's an element of forgiveness. And also the 149 Tibetans who burned themselves. And it's very painful death. When someone can burn oneself, one can definitely hurt others. But even the 149 Tibetans who burned themselves is a violent death. They have not hurt even a single Chinese person or property. Even at that painful, process, there's restraint, on the part of Tibetan people. So the forgiveness is already, it's reflected in every action that Tibetans have taken so far.
So, can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
So then, what would you offer to communities around them? You spoke about other refugee communities, and as Dr. Chapple mentioned in the American situation, slavery and all of its remnants and aftermath, what would you recommend to other communities who face similar atrocities in trying to move forward and in their own processes of forgiveness?
Yeah, one should find a solution that is acceptable and agreeable to yourself first. And then measure it whether it's acceptable to other side or not. As far as Tibet is saying, if we are granted genuine autonomy, it's acceptable to us. And then we also tell the Chinese government it's acceptable to you, based on what you're saying. And then, we are yet to reach there. Till we find a solution, we won't know. But our thinking at least is, when we get there, we will move on. Because as a human being, you have a choice to look at glass half empty and half full. If you look at glass half empty, you can complain all your life. Rather, it's better to look at glass half full and move on, so that you can exist and live as a human being to the fullest, so that you don't get trapped in this dependent syndrome or victim syndrome where you blame others and not do things yourself. So that's the mindset. Once we get there, we look at glass half full. Whatever we have, we will live fullest, and we will also develop our capacity to the fullest, and then we will be resourceful and we will be capable and build our own identity, build our own dignity, and keep moving forward and progress. So that's the mindset, at least. Until we cross that line, we won't know. But that's the Tibetan mindset. So even in exile, our mindset is very similar. When I went to Australia, I was asked this question. Now, how will you react to all the Australian leaders who will meet with you and don't meet with you? Now, you can look at it from the point of view of victim, or glass half full, glass half empty, and say then you blame all of them. Right? You say, oh, the Australian leaders have betrayed their own principles and how dare not meet me, I'm democratically elected, I can have 108 complaints. And our mindset is very simple. I told them, I said, well, in Australian terms, no worries to those who don't meet with me, and no worries to those who meet with me. Because I appreciate all those who meet with me and thank them, share with them whatever they want to know, and no worries to those who don't want to meet with me. What's the point of complaining when they're not meeting with you? Because your complaints will not get anywhere anyways, right? So I think, if I may try to use one Buddhist line, great Shantideva scholar said, if you can solve a problem, why worry about it? If you cannot solve a problem, what is the point of worrying about it? If leaders don't want to meet with me, why should I worry about it? No, because there's no point worrying about it. Rather, you have to move on. So the Shantideva, with due respect to Professor Chapple here, who is a scholar of Buddhism, equanimity is, is our mindset. Whatever comes before you, deal with equanimity. Neither high nor low, go with the flow. Those who meet with you, good. Those who don't meet with you, no worries. Rather, you focus your energy on something positive and with that meeting. So, that's, I think, it's our mindset. That's why I think His Holiness Dalai Lama is the happiest guy in this world. But if you read his history, if you read his biography, it's filled with tragedies after tragedies after tragedies. He should be depressed and he should be in some cave in mountains, Rather, he's out there in the world living, he's laughing all the time. The joy that you get, the strength that you get, is from being glass half full and being positive. Like that's the contribution of Buddhism. That's why we always say we don't have hatred towards Chinese people. What we're against is the hardline policies of the Chinese government. We try to separate the government policies and the people.
Thank you. Going back to going back to the middle way approach between Tibet and China. If Tibet were to gain an autonomous region in China, how would that be viewed by the rest of the world? Could we see that is that similar to Taiwan or Hong Kong situation?
Yeah, I think genuine autonomy that we seek actually is a little less than Hong Kong. It's less than Taiwan. Because genuine autonomy that we seek is based on Article 12 of the Chinese Constitution and Article 4 of the Minority Nationality Act. But one country, two system of Hong Kong is based on Article 32 of the Chinese Constitution. So it's a one country, two system, a special administrative region. The one we propose is based on Minority Nationality Act. So a little less than that, but an autonomous, genuinely autonomous Tibetan area.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one is, for those of you who haven't been in, for those of us who haven't been in India, I'm just curious about the life for Tibetans in China and the life of Tibetans in India. What's actually the difference? I know you said that the Indian government has, supported Tibetan people, but in terms of the rights, do they get equal rights as the other Indian nationals? That's one question. question. And the other question is there actually any Chinese leader that supports the Tibetan people? I'm just curious. And if so, can I get a name as well? I can research on him.
I think more likely he will be in prison. The difference between the life of Tibetans in India and China is India is democratic and China is not. So that sets the parameter. Because in India, Tibetans can be there in the streets of India protesting against anyone and anybody, and that you are not likely to go to jail unless a Chinese dignitary is coming. Then when you try to protest, you will end up in Chanakyapuri police station, where I've been a frequent visitor myself, sometimes even in jail, because that's the national security leaders concerned. Now, when we came to India in 1959-60s, our parents, in Holiness, Dalai Lama, 8,000 Tibetans came without, they lost everything. They barely had anything. They lost their home, family, property, wealth, everything. And then we rebuilt everything in India. So if you come to India, you will find, I'll give you some numbers, 265 monasteries and nunneries, functioning autonomously, 42,000 monks and nuns, of which 57% are from Himalayan region. So 40% are from Tibet, and the remaining, I think 7% are exile-born Tibetans. So you see, we are running our own schools, running our own hospitals, running our own settlements, like any other government. So the freedom that you see in India, that Tibetans enjoy, is unique. As I told you, yes, Tibetans don't have equal rights as Indian citizens because we are refugee or we are foreigner. But our literacy rate, if we can, make progress, our refugee, the literacy rate is higher than many of the countries in South Asia. So that way we have made enormous progress, and the Indian government in India has allowed us a space for us to grow. Now, as far as China is concerned, the fundamental difference is this. Yes, there are Tibetans who have benefited, who have become rich and they do business, but the system that's imposed on the Tibetan people in Tibet is to assimilate Tibetans into Chinese. That's the main reason. For example, Tibetan language is not the medium of instruction at the university level, high school level, or even middle school level. Now even at primary school level. So what they're trying to do is, when you prevent Tibetans from learning courses in Tibetan language, but mandate they learn in Chinese language, then you are making Tibetan to Chinese people. As far as religious freedom is concerned, and there are cases of Larunga monastery, from 12,000 monks and nuns, it's reduced to 5,000. So this is a 12 months project, and nuns and monks have been expelled, it's reduced to 5,000 nuns. Now they have launched another, Chinese government just launched this campaign to reduce the number of nuns in Yachinga from 6,000 to a few thousands. So this kind of projects are going on. So that's why there are self-immolation of Tibetan people. Now self-immolators are young, old, nomads, farmers, business people, teachers, students, so you name it. So in short, Tibetans in Tibet don't enjoy the basic freedom that Tibetans in India enjoy. And now Tibetans in Tibet can have some social space, some have economic space, but not the freedom that we talk about. For example, Tashi Wangchuk, his case is profiled by even New York Times. He's an educationist. All he wanted was to implement bilingual education system in Tibetan areas. So Chinese constitution allows that, Chinese laws allows that, in fact encourages that. But he proposed that bilingual be the medium of instruction in schools, and he is in prison now. So he went all the way to Beijing to appeal to the Chinese government that bilingual will be allowed. He is in prison. So his story is being profiled by New York Times. So you can, I can give you many cases like that. The Tibetan businessman and environmentalist, he was given a national award for being a successful businessman and an environmentalist. But after some time, he was put behind bars. He's in prison now. He's a national awardee. He's in prison. So whenever someone become very successful, and then Chinese government see them as threat, and they are put behind bars. So that way, these are the main differences between Tibetans in India and China. Now, what was the second question?
The second question was, is there any...
Oh, it's the Chinese leaders.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Chinese leaders, yes. I can give you one name. Huyaba. Huyaba was, as we all know, was one of the most liberal leaders of China. And he proposed a reform in Tibet. He proposed 80-20 proposal, by which he meant to say there be only 20% Chinese Communist Party members in Tibet, 80% should be Tibetan who will run the administration of Tibetan areas. Huyaba, he proposed that. And religious freedom and linguistic freedom be provided, be afforded to the Tibetan people. So Huyaba proposed these things, but soon thereafter he lost his power. Now, not just Huyaba, I can give you other examples. Tibet Autonomous Region. The most powerful person has always been the party secretary of the Communist Party. But in the last 60 years, not even a single Tibetan has become the party secretary of Tibet Autonomous Region. Now, the highest body which governs Tibet Autonomous Region is also standing committee. They normally have anywhere from 7 to 13 members. This is the most powerful body. Of the 13, I've checked the list before, this 5 years old data. Of the 13, 7 are Chinese. So the majority are Chinese. Now if you analyze the remaining 6, they are half Chinese, married to Chinese, or have Chinese mistress or whatever. So their blood or their affiliation to Chinese of the remaining 6 is also measured. So that's the highest and the most powerful body. Forget about party secretary, has never been a Tibetan. Now, the highest person, highest Tibetan who has, is often the governor of Tibet Autonomous Region. If you analyze the past governors of Tibet Autonomous Region who have been in Tibet, the day you retire, next day they write a letter to Deng Xiaoping, then to Cheng Zemin and Hu Jintao, saying, please talk to Dalai Lama if you want to find a solution for the Tibet issue. You have been a lifelong Communist Party member. You have climbed the ladder of leadership and you have reached the highest, the governor, who is not powerful. The day you retire, you write to Chinese leaders and honestly share what you actually think. It is, I am just a puppet, I am not the solution, Dalai Lama is the solution. Please talk to him, bring him back. Then you find a peaceful solution to the Tibet issue. So there are, evidence, quite substantial to say that even Hu Yaban felt liberal policy is the best way to address the issue of Tibet. And all the governors, of Tibetan governors, have proposed to the Chinese leadership that talking to Dalai Lama is the solution. You can Google and find all this list. Yeah. They have retired, so.
We gotta get more people like that.
That's true, yes.
I have one question, which is related to the flow of Tibetans fleeing from Tibet. If you could give a little bit of history, especially for people who are not Tibetans here, after the initial outflow of Tibetans, the refugees who left. So maybe last 10, 15 years. I do know that Nepal really cracked down a few years ago, and I'm wondering what the current status is. And of those who are coming, How many are children and how many are adults?
Before 2008, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000, sometimes even 5,000 Tibetans fled Tibet through Nepal to India. But after 2008, Nepali government has really cracked down on those Tibetans who are crossing the mountains, and now it's trickled down to 200 to 300 Tibetans a year. So from 2000s now it's reduced to few hundreds. So unfortunately, the Nepali government has come under pressure from the Chinese government. So unfortunately, the Chinese embassy in Kathmandu is more powerful than the US embassy or the Indian embassy now, as far as Tibetan people are concerned. So that's unfortunate because Nepal and Tibet share long history, cultural similarities. In fact, when Nepal applied for its UN membership, they cited 7 evidence. And of the 7 evidence, I think the number 1, if not number 1 or number 2, was their treaty relationship with Tibet. So Tibet was used as an evidence. Nepal was a sovereign country when it applied for its UN membership. But despite all these things, Nepal is under tremendous pressure. So Tibetans are finding it difficult to cross the mountains of Tibet to come to Nepal and to Tibet and to India. The ages, it depends from 6 years, even 4 years old to 60 years old.
Okay, one more question.
With regards to Tibet being the water tower of Asia, and the water flowing into places like India, Pakistan, and Vietnam, Vietnamese, do other Asian countries surrounding Tibet have any role in dialogue with China? Does like Vietnam or Pakistan play a role in Tibet's conversations with Chinese leadership?
I wish, not much. Even for Tibet being the water tower of Asia, China has not signed the UN Convention on Water Sharing. So that means they are not bound to share water. Even if they have signed that agreement, does not necessarily mean Chinese government abide by the agreement. UK and China signed a treaty agreement on the transfer of Hong Kong to China. And recently, on the 20th anniversary of the transfer of Hong Kong to China, Xi Jinping said, "Oh, that treaty is old, we are not bound by it." I mean, it's a treaty. Once you sign a treaty, you are bound by it. He said, no, it's gone. And UK made mild protest, rest of the world just looked, didn't do much. So I think neighboring countries have to, with the recent Doklam issue, where there was Chinese army incursion in the Bhutanese area, and there was a standoff for almost 2 months, more than 2 months. That has generated a lot of debate in India, and also in Bhutan, and in South Asia. What is this? And then, of course, we know the issue of the airports and airfields being built in South China Sea, whole island being built in South China Sea, East China Sea, Scarborough Island. So all the neighboring countries are debating, what is this, what's going on, But we have seen that, Tibetans, we have seen that in 1950s and 60s. So, part of the reason why world should know or care about Tibet is what we have been saying, what happened to us could happen to you. 60 years ago, when Tibet was occupied, all the neighboring countries said, "Oh, it happened to you, very sadly, well, good luck to you." Now, 60 years later, when it's happening to the rest of the neighboring countries, they're saying, "What happened to us?" And we've been, Tibetans, we've been telling you for 60 years, it happened to us, it could happen to you, you never believed. Now, South China Sea, Scarborough Island, Doklam, you just go on and on. They're saying, what is this? Now, at least some people in some countries saying, we don't want to be like Tibet. So Tibet has become the reference point. So let me end by saying, if you want to know China, where all the rest of the world, they want to know China. If you truly want to know China, you have to understand the Tibetan narrative. You have to understand the Tibetan story. If you don't understand the Tibetan story, you won't understand China. So that way, we are relevant for your own sake, if not for 6 million Tibetans. Hopefully, some of you will study more about Tibet and see a mirror image of what's happening to the rest of the world and rest of the neighboring countries. So with that note, I think now my yellow curry and also fully digested, and as well as my East Coast and India time. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
I would like to, on behalf of the Tibetan Association of Southern California and our community and friends here today, I'd like to first of all express our deep appreciation and thanks to President Dr. Lobsang Sangay, our elected leader, and for your sacrifices, your leadership, and your selflessness. It's an inspiration to all of us. And I'd like to just say, if some of you may not know this, when His Holiness was there in 2011, and I was actually in that parliament, reluctantly, out of 43 members of parliament that had to support His Holiness' wishes to devolve his authority. When President Dr. Sangay took oath of office, His Holiness mentioned that his long-cherished goal of democracy was finally fulfilled. So all of you know how valuable and certainly inspiration His Holiness is to all of us and his tireless efforts on behalf of the Tibetan people and humanity. But when you see that His Holiness continues at his age 82, still works hard for humanity, then to express that, that certainly is for us Tibetans and all supporters of Tibet and Tibetans, and certainly His Holiness, we feel that you have taken a tremendously difficult responsibility and alleviated some of the burden that His Holiness had. And as so that is something I'd like to again thank you for. That is something that all of us should certainly appreciate and we should know. Now the other thing I would like to also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Chapple and my professor from 30 years ago for reconnecting, for certainly allowing us to host this co-host Dr. Chapple's Department of Yoga Studies and Dr. Ramos from Anchor from International Relations were very kind and generous in co-hosting this event at very short notice. And the LMU leadership, as we said earlier, the President and Dean, would like to thank all of them. I'd like to ask to offer the scarf of appreciation. And lastly, if I may, just indulge a minute of your time. Thank you all for your caring and your certainly interest. Your attendance here means so much to all of us. And while I, certainly, so one of the things I certainly took away, learned from President Dr. Lobsang Sangay's remarks and certainly talked to the young girl of the chapel. Not just Tibet, but humanity, global-wise, there's so much concern that we have, that we all ought to be aware of and concerned about. But one of the things I also want to say, as a former member of parliament and as a Tibet activist in Tibet, you know, as you heard, how difficult it is for His Holiness and now for our President, Dr. Sangay, to deal with China. Because China will not even, send a delegation that would recognize the exiled Tibetan government. So this is a very difficult situation. And this is why it's very important for all of us to realize that we cannot just say, we've elected our leader, and they have done tremendous work, traveling all over the world. This last few weeks, Dr. Sangay has traveled all over the West Coast, and we'll be going to next week more. We still have tomorrow morning another 3 events in Westminster. I'd like to mention them to you right now. There's Tibetan Democracy Celebration. We'll be commemorating the 57th anniversary of Tibetan Democracy Day at the Chapple Temple in Westminster. Our website, www.socaltibet.org, has the event. Followed by, at 9:30, the Human Rights Conference on Tibet and Vietnam. We have Honorable President as a panelist, as well as the famous Vietnamese human rights activist.
enough sleep
So I would like to encourage all of you to attend that. That would be another. And then we also have distinguished, Congressman Rohrabacher has confirmed, Mayor Trita, as well as other distinguished guests, California State Senator. And today we were very privileged to have Congressman Alan Lowenthal meet with our president, as well as Congresswoman Judy Chu, be at a luncheon along with Mayor Trita, Mayor Steve Jones, and other congressional staffers. So this is indeed very certainly for us. I want to thank the President, because none of this would have happened if we, the Tibetan Association, appealed to members of Congress to attend. Certainly with because of your presence here, they all came. So now I want to finally appeal to all of you to say, this is very important, that we as certainly Tibetans, friends of Tibet, students, activists, need to do what we can for Tibetans, compassion for the 6 million Tibetans, but 1.3 billion Chinese of our friends. Of course, our Vietnamese, we have 95 million Vietnamese suffering in Vietnam. So that is why, please come tomorrow, and please continue to, raise awareness so that leaders like President Dr. Sangay can certainly have the leverage, because otherwise, South Africa didn't happen without but all the people that rose together. So we cannot, so this is why, again, I want to thank all of you today. Thank you, Dr. Everyone, due to time limitations, we